G'day and thanks for joining us. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the First Peoples of this country, past, present and future. I'd also like to acknowledge the country and how it's returned after this season of horrific fires. A number of years ago, a group of us decided to work together with our various fuel management agencies to think about a plan for managing fuel around and in Mallacoota to give us a bit more protection in the case of a fire. We're obviously a couple of years too late, and the fire did what it did. But since the fire, we've reconvened, and we felt that one of the things that it might be useful to do was to talk with you about the knowledge that can help us to manage fuel and manage emergencies in our town. So we put together a series of webinars to start that debate. We also felt that probably because of COVID and all sorts of other things, we haven't had the time and the opportunity to really talk about what happened on the days preceding and the morning and afternoon of the fire. So we have some of the local people who were in command for those few days to just talk us through what happened, what they knew about the fire, the resources that they had at their hands, and how they felt about the outcome of the fire. So I hope you find that informative. We'll also talk specifically about the outcome for this year, the outlook for this year. There is an orchid that comes up. It only comes up after hot summer fires. Now, I've never seen this orchid before, but it has come up now in Mallacoota, and it's a triumphant little orchid, and I think it's a really lovely symbol for our community of how we've come through this fire and how we've triumphed. So I hope you enjoy these webinars. Thanks a lot. G'day. I'd like to introduce you to Daryl Burns, who is the Ranger in charge of fire and emergency operations in East Gippsland. G'day, Dash.
G'day, Lynn.
Righto, Dash. What does that actually mean in terms of your job?
My job, Lynn, is it's quite diverse, but obviously it focuses on fire and emergency work all across of East Gippsland. Yes, I'm a Mallacoota resident, but my role takes me all the way from the coast to our high country across East Gippsland. And probably the most succinct way I can describe it is very focused on what I refer to as planning, preparation and responses for emergencies, whatever they might be.
Obviously, there was a lot of planning that you'd done for Mallacoota in case of an emergency. What is it?
For quite some time, not just myself, but representatives from the other emergency agencies in the Mallacoota community have come together and have planned for emergency responses here. Certainly the threat of fire has been one of those we've planned for. So we've developed products for the community, local incident management plans to help guide and inform the community, as much as we've spent time investing in how our agencies work together and how we can best support the community at the time of its greatest need.
Tell me a little bit about this fire, how it progressed, why you took the actions you did, and that'll do.
So it was referred to as the Wing and Inlet banana track fire. It was started by lightning south of the Princess Highway. It was actually detected via satellite data. So as much as we've had our fire towers up, looking for fires, and we've had aircraft surveillance, we hadn't detected that fire, and we believe that's a mechanism of just how much smoke there was all through Gippsland, because remembering at that point in time there was a whole lot of fire all through Gippsland, and certainly myself and my colleagues, we'd been busy for quite some period of time before the banana track fire commenced. Given how dry the landscape was and that extended dryness, all the fuels that were in the bush were available, and that fire became very active very quickly. We did deploy resources, of course, to the fire, but the resources we had available to us just simply could not contain that fire given how vigorous it was going. Even the large aircraft we used did a little bit to slow the spread of fire, but ultimately it just built and became a very significant fire in the landscape, and one that certainly impacted not just Mallacoota but the adjoining district, and it found its way all the way up into New South Wales onto the doorstep of Bega and went beyond.
During the actual fire front coming through, you were the divisional commander. What does that mean, and how did you attack the fire?
Yes, Lynn, I was appointed as a divisional commander. I was actually on a couple of rest days looking after our kids. I just returned from deployment to Swifts Creek, working on fires up there, and was asked to return to provide that role here in Mallacoota. Recognising certainly the significance of that fire, so the size, the intensity, immediately realised it posed a big impact, a very significant impact to Mallacoota. And given the ferocity of that fire, in terms of attacking it, it was not a feasible option to put firefighters out there. We were hard pressed to have resources given all the other events that were going on in Mallacoota. So our strategy was very much built around defend, and our strategy is always around protect human life, property, and defend community and assets. And that was very much the strategy we employed.
Just as a reflection, Dash, how did you feel about the fire and the outcome of the fire?
In terms of this fire, this is very different, certainly for myself, and I've been a firefighter for some 25 years and I've done this work over Victoria and interstate and even overseas, so I am accustomed to these large wildfires, but this is a very different scenario for me, because here's a fire that's impacting the community I live in, where my family are, where friends are, where our home is. So that comes with an added degree of challenge, I suppose.
So Dash, in general terms, do you reckon you did a good job?
The comment I'd make is we, not just me, but the collective we. I wasn't here by myself. I was supported by other colleagues from Forest Fire Management Victoria, from CFA, from police, from ambulance, from SES. All those agencies pulled together and we did the best we possibly could given the circumstance we were presented with. And that was a large, fast moving, intense fire bearing down on Mallacoota, and I, like many in this community, won't forget what happened, and won't forget the terrible loss of people's homes and assets in the town. But I'm particularly thankful that we didn't have a terrible loss of life here, because that was a very real possibility.
We're talking to Stewie Johnson, Station Commander, who was in charge of preparation for the fire and working through the fire on the day and the evening and into recovery.
My role with Victoria Police as legislator, that's under the Emergency Management Act, and I'm an Incident Emergency Response Coordinator for an event. I represent the Municipal Emergency Response Coordinator, and it goes up to state tier, so there's a municipal, regional and then state levels. For a fire, the State Emergency Response Coordinator is actually the Emergency Management Commissioner. On this particular event, because it was so big, it was so dynamic, and a lot of East Gippsland was burning, they were relying on local police to be able to give them the feedback, ensure the security and the safety of people as best could be in the circumstances, and make sure that the response was effective and ongoing. And that is essentially the biggest role we have, is to make sure that the combat agency, which in this case was a combination of CFA and forest firefighting management, were able to effect a response and ensure it was ongoing. On the lead up to the fires, because there was so much fire in the landscape throughout East Gippsland, I was expecting a fire that was burning north of Cairn River to impact Mallacoota. So I requested all the emergency management agencies in Mallacoota to come to a meeting here at the CFA shed about 4 or 5 days out from the fire that actually impacted us. And that was to bring everyone together, and we do that under our local incident management plan. Is if there's a major event, we bring everyone together. And the reason we do that is to make sure that, one, we've got people that can respond, because with Mallacoota being such a unique area, it's so far from assistance, we rely on what we have. So bringing them all together, we've got the ability to see who's around, make sure their equipment's up to date, and by doing that, it prompts them to go back to their own agency sheds, check their gear, make sure the fuel's up, the oil's up, everything's working, chainsaws are operating, pumps are working, and then they come back and report back again and go, yep, we're all good to go, and we know we can then implement the plans. One of the things the fire brigade here has is a plan to defend certain areas, and they were the school, the people that where they said that they would go, and that came under the LIMP plan, the local incident management plan. People told us they would go to the neighbourhood safer place. So we knew we had to put vehicles at the neighbourhood safer place to protect them. We also, through that planning, got permission to use the main hall, the recreation hall, to put the aged, the infirm and the children into. And by doing that, we knew we would protect them from ember attack, but again, it meant a resource had to be there. And the other place that was vitally important was the pub, because it has a commercial kitchen and has the ability therefore to feed this town. Should an event occur, thankfully it didn't to that extent, but should the event occur that there is so much damage and destruction and people are living in tents, caravans until we can get things sorted out, we have the ability to feed them and supply them with sustenance. So that pretty much takes up all the equipment that this Mallacoota Brigade has. So the important part for us under the Emergency Management Act and under the Victoria Police Act is the saving of lives. That takes paramount. So property for me is secondary, but we'll make sure that people are best looked after. And around Mallacoota we have a lot of outlying districts. We have Gypsy Point, Genoa, Wongrabale, Roxham, places like that. People live out in those places. The density varies. Gypsy Point has got quite a few compared to the other outlying areas. But one of the things that we do as police is make sure that if the emergency response controlling agency, in this case Forest Fire Management, CFA, if they don't do the messaging, then it's up to Victoria Police to make sure that messaging gets done under the Act. So what we do is we get our people to start ringing around to those local communities just to make sure that they're aware of what's coming, because again, although it goes out on electronic media, it doesn't necessarily mean those outlying areas have a reception for that electronic media. So we were lucky enough here, we had holiday policing at the time, so we had extra police, so I could task them to actually phone people up and to drive out to areas, to camping areas that are remote locations, just to let people know that if they were there, come back into town. And our message was quite clear: come to Mallacoota, we can protect you here. We won't be able to protect you in those outlying areas. Now, at that point, if you choose to stay in an outlying area, then you do so, and you do so with the knowledge that you'll be alone for a period of time, and we don't know how long that will be. So thankfully, most people came into town or left the area. There were a lot of people that evacuated into New South Wales or relocated into New South Wales. We had community messaging happening here at the main recreation reserve, and at that location we spoke to people because we had about 10,000 people in town at that stage.
So one of the things that I have a really strong memory of, Stu, is that the afternoon before the fire came through, there was a huge community meeting out on the recreation centre, and you held up a rather large portable radio and you said to people, this is what is going to fall on you. What were you trying to do, scare people?
So no, it's not a matter of trying to scare people. It is a matter of trying to give them the best information so that they can make a value judgment, because it's their safety that is really important. And for us to be able to protect people, they have to know what they're about to face. And so holding up a portable radio to identify the size of an ember, because it's not like burning off in the backyard, this is a big bushfire where things will fly through the air for long periods of time, retain their heat, they'll hit the ground burning. People need to know that if you are exposed to that, you can be injured or worse. So by explaining to people and not sugarcoating something, they understand this is a situation. I had some people come back after the fires that evacuated on that day. They left and went to New South Wales. And from New South Wales, they got directed eventually up to Bateman's Bay. And we told them that they would turn tonight. It will sound like a jet engine. These are the embers, the size of embers that will fall. And these people said to me, everything you said that would happen in Mallacoota happened at Bateman's Bay. But the difference was we were prepared for it. We knew it was going to happen. And they said that made their decision to leave Mallacoota absolute there and then. They packed their car up, left their caravan and drove out because they knew that if they stayed here, the other problem we have with Mallacoota is we don't have water, we don't have food, we don't have power, we don't have phones, we don't have communication systems. Once they drop out, they stay out for long periods of time, as was the case with this fire. Whereas by going north, they were able to get home. Yes, they had an impact of fire, and yes, it was bad, but they were able then to continue their journey and get back to Melbourne. They came in and thanked me personally at the police station for telling them that, because up until that point, they were prepared to stay. So by not pretending that it will be good, by not telling them it's going to be okay, people can make a valued judgment decision based on their own personal circumstance.
During this particular fire, there was patches that were burnt really heavily and patches that weren't burnt really heavily. It seems really hard to follow what was going on, and I know people have said to me that the wind changed. You know, they were saved because the wind changed. Was that true?
So we had a pyrocumulus cloud that was approaching this town, and it was started from the bushfire out near Banana Track. It burnt to the coast. It was supposed to take, on the predictions maps that we had, 26 hours. It took 5. It stayed dormant there for a little bit, and then when the wind changed and turned from to the southwest, it started steaming back towards Mallacoota as a pyrocumulus cloud. What a fire does when it, whatever size it is, it will draw in oxygen. It will draw oxygen in from a 360-degree radius if it's available. So as it came closer to town, because it was such a big fire, it was drawing all that air in. So if you were down at the wharf where people were safest place to be, and you felt air coming across your shoulder as you looked towards the red sky, it wasn't a wind change. It was the fire sucking up the air from behind you. And it was such a big fire and such an intense fire that it felt like the wind had changed before the fire arrived. But the reality is this: if the wind had changed, the fire would not have come. It was still moving because there was a bigger, stronger wind behind it pushing it this way, but it felt like the air was coming from behind you across the water.
Thanks. Stu, this is a huge responsibility that you carry. You were looking after all of your friends, your family, the people of Mallacoota. On reflection, what do you think about the outcome of what happened on that during that time? Did you think it was successful? Absolutely.
As a young bloke, in 1983, I was on the back of a fire truck in Ash Wednesday at Beaconsfield and Upper Beaconsfield when the fire impacted that location. I can remember cars on the side of the road as we were driving around after the major fire had impacted, and we later learned that in some of those cars there were bodies. What happened back then were people were told to leave, but they weren't told where to go to. So we've learned a lot from that. With this event, we made the connection. We said, come to Mallacoota. The local incident management plan was where community input was. We will go to this location. That takes all that guesswork out for emergency service agencies, and they know where the people will mass. We can put our resources there to protect them. With the fires of 1983, so many lessons were able to be learned. So I was able, because I was there, to put those learnings into this event, into the lead up of this event. That's why I dragged everyone from all these agencies together into this shed prior to. Not for this fire that hit us, but for the fire that we thought would hit us in 2 weeks' time. So we were due to meet again, and we did, on the day the fire started here. And by doing that, previously bringing them together, they were already in that mindset of this will hit us. This is what we need to do as our agencies, to work together, to come together to give the best collaborative result. So no one died in Mallacoota that night. So I'm incredibly proud that no one died that night. I look at other locations north of the border and they weren't so lucky. And I don't know why. I have some ideas, but I don't know why. But I'm grateful that people behaved the way that they said they would behave. They made their conscious decision based on the best information and evidence that they had at the time. And the amazing ability of the people in this town that joined these agencies, put in and didn't worry about themselves, they worried about the collective, bigger group of people. That's why we had such a great result. That's why no one perished in Mallacoota.
Welcome, Stuart Krelsham. You were the Assistant Chief Fire Officer looking after the fire at Mallacoota. It was nice and safe in your hands. Basically, you're CFA personnel and you happened to be in the area when the fire sort of took off. Would you like to tell us what you knew about the fire when you arrived here?
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. So I was at Bairnsdale helping out the region and pretty much been the link between the CFA district and region and the Bairnsdale ICC. And I was asked to go firstly to Orbost to take over from a CFA commander, Rick Owen, who just happens to be a fellow recruit member of mine. And when I got to Orbost, I was asked to keep going to Mallacoota. So I had a general idea of the fire, the progression of the fire as it burnt from south to north initially, and then that it had turned around and pushed back towards that great wet fire break.
And so when you arrived here, what resources did you have and what did you do with them?
Yeah, so initially I had no idea what resources were there because it was pretty much a last minute dash and having limited mobile phone coverage through that period of time and trying to get little bits of information. So the resources were obviously the 3 CFA strike teams that had moved into the area. One of them at very short notice, and if you remember, had no clothes, no equipment apart from the fire trucks and what they left. I met Daryl Burns, Dash, for the first time and understood that he had a number of slip-ons and some heavy equipment at his disposal, and obviously the local brigade meeting the team there with a few tankers. So 17, 18 tankers, a couple of slip-ons and a couple of graders.
And from my memory, one of the first things you did was to, what we did was to take those crews around Mallacoota because they didn't know it, but you had an idea of assets that you wanted to protect, and I believe you divided the town up into 3 sectors. Would you just like to talk about that a bit?
Yep, sure. Now, Matt from Bendigo, who's one of the strike team leaders, had already started work on identifying the critical infrastructure in consultation with the local brigade. So what were the things that were important to the community? So the Telstra tower, the school, the other assets around there. So that was already well on the way. The other thing was to familiarise ourselves with the township and the layout. And correct, we had 3 strike teams, and we divided, put one strike team up to the north there with the Carbathong area, one which was pushed out towards the Abalone farm that was going to, if a fire came in that way, and then the one to the south down to the golf course. And
can you just run through for us what the experience was like on the night? Oh, sorry, it wasn't the night. We all felt it was night, but it wasn't actually the night. It was in the morning.
It was for many of us, as you know, Lynn, a bit of a blur and a long, hard slog. One of the things, as I do when I get back into those situations, I really try and get back to basics. And there's a thing called LACES, which is lookouts, awareness, communications, escape routes, and safety zones. And so the plan was to to ensure that we had lookouts posted, because predictive maps can be limited information. There's nothing better than having someone who knows the area eyeballing it. So that's where Dash and his crew were fantastic, had eyes on that fire. We had a really good situational awareness about the weather conditions and where that was happening through that local knowledge of the brigade and Dash and his team. The communications we tested and we knew exactly where the dead spots were, and we knew that we needed to maintain the communications with yourself and others at the LCF to have coverage across the whole fire ground. And everyone knew, because of that familiarisation, where the safety zones were and how to escape. And probably the other thing we did, which was a little bit unique, we actually had eyes on the fire, but we also had that eyes on the community. So we knew exactly, had an awareness. So when that community you started moving up to Carterton to the boat ramp there, we actually knew that was happening. We were able to move resources up there. We had a number of communications mediums through the local radio until the batteries went flat. We were communicating, funny enough, through a gentleman who was tweeting on the beach, and we were getting a fair bit of information through someone in actually Sale who was feeding me that information, and the community had their escape routes and their safety zones as well. So that was probably where that relationship with the community and ourselves really aided. That's a long. What was it like? It was pretty scary. As I said in an article I wrote soon after, there was something really weird from a boy in Wangaratta to have nowhere to go, have the ocean at your back. But in saying that, I think we had a really good plan and we had good people.
There was also technological information that was available in terms of Phoenix modelling or modelling of how the fire was progressing from a satellite image.
Yeah, so there was the Sentinel hotspots. Again, you really need to be a fire behaviour analyst to really understand what that's telling you, and it's only one part of the picture. So we can be a lot of times deceived by predictive winds, because they can be reliant on weather stations, and I'm not sure actually where the nearest weather station is to Mallacoota, but let's say it's in Orbost. As you know, the local conditions at Mallacoota could be very different to what's at Orbost. So you just have to validate that sort of information.
Yeah. And just finally, would you like to comment on the outcome of the fire and your role in it? Did you feel that it was successful? Do you think you had a win?
Well, anyone who loses a home, I've thought long and hard about could we have saved more houses on the day? Could we have saved the abalone farm, etc.? The what ifs. I probably would have, if someone had asked me the day before the fire hit, no loss of life, no injuries, 100 houses, a community that's strong and can rebuild. We take it or leave it. I would have taken it every day of the week. Again, tragic losses, but an outcome which I think we can say we had a crack and was a pretty good result.
Yeah, look, thanks, Sooty. I was with you in the station for the whole of that evening and all of that next day, and I know how hard it was, and I know how the responsibility weighed on you. So, Mallacoota thanks you.
Thanks, Lynn. And I actually, I remember your support and the support of the rest of the brigade, and what an amazing group of people. And I can't wait when the world gets back to normal to come back and say hello again.
Good on you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for very much for joining us. Now, you are employed by DELP, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. Can you just give us a brief overview of what that means?
Yeah, my role currently with DELP is the bushfire recovery manager for Gippsland. However, I've had a long sort of history in Gippsland for 30 years and closely associated with strategic fire planning. During the fires, I had a role as an incident controller, sort of out of Bairnsdale. So, very close involvement in the fires over the last summer.
So would you like to comment upon our summer fires, and especially in East Gippsland?
Yeah, sure. I guess everyone has their different ways of explaining, the fire risks. For me, it really comes down to 4 factors. The weather you get on the day, the long-term climatic conditions, and particularly droughts, which play a really important role. And if you look back through history, there's a really strong correlation between, drought events and bad fire seasons, such as 1939, 2009, very strong correlation all the way through. So dryness is a really important aspect. The third aspect is fuel loads and availability. And the fourth is geography, where you're located in the landscape relative to the prevailing weather and winds and vegetation, and the land use and access around you. And if we think of Mallacoota, through the season we've just come through, probably all 4 of those boxes were ticked or in play. The prevailing winds and where the forests are located with Mallacoota make it inherently, reasonably high fire risk. We did have a lot of fuel loads, and we did have a very serious drought, which was a real driver. But if you compare that with the year we're coming into, all of the predictions are that the weather conditions, like so far this year, we've had average rainfall, and the predictions are over the next 3 months that we're going to have above average rainfall. There'll still be some underlying dryness there because it takes a while to catch up on that dryness in the soils. But we are experiencing better weather in terms of rainfall, and importantly with the fuels, obviously we've substantial areas were burnt last year, so there's a lot less fuel around, which plays into the risk factors. So last year was high risk, all the boxes were ticked. This year, it looks like we're probably, a lot of those risk factors are reduced. And if you go to the CSIRO, who produce an outlook on fire risk, they're predicting for our area a normal fire season or potentially a below normal fire season. So, and if you add the lower fuel loads on top of that, you'd have to say that the risk is lower coming into this summer. That doesn't mean there's no risk. That doesn't mean we won't see fires, but it's definitely going into this season, the risk is a lot lower. I would suggest to people, if they're interested, that CSIRO and Bushfire Research Centre put out a quarterly report on the prognosis for the season. So they will be updating that every 3 months. So you can certainly, Google seasonal outlook, Bushfire Cooperative Research Centre, and get the latest prognosis. But what it looks like at the moment is that we're going to see below normal fire activity due to the influence of the La Nina and a tendency towards an Indian Ocean dipole, which are 2 climatic events which mean that we're set up for probably the wettest climate scenario with those 2 factors, that you normally get. That's a prediction though. We still have to monitor that as we go through. But those predictions suggest above average, October to December rainfall. Like I said, there still will be lingering effects of the recent multi-year drought, just because of the persistence of, that dead surface material and the dryness in the soil, which takes, 2 to 3 years to get over. So that, that means that, we could still end up with, fires, substantially wind driven, but we're highly unlikely to see, the sort of campaign fire activity that, we experienced last year.
Yeah, I guess the fact that there has been so much burning around Mallacoota does mean that if there is any fire, the intensity and the heat is going to be a lot lower than we saw last year. But I would also imagine that people need to continue to personally take responsibility for their own houses and all of that kind of procedure that we You know, we're aware of the gutters, the clearing up the mess, and well, making sure that you know, your firewood is stored elsewhere, and all of those really basic things need to be put in place. But basically, we don't need to be panicking about this year. That the severity and even perhaps the opportunity of really hot fires is pretty low.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, fire risk is still there, like I said, and we still need to do all of the things, but we should have a lot more confidence going into this year than last year. And if I could just talk a little bit about, you know, fuel loads. Obviously, you know, big fires last year reduced a lot of the fuel. They do reaccumulate in the forest, but you know, it normally takes, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 years before they build to a level where you know, they have a significant, you know, influence on fire behaviour. So, you know, there is this, you know, period, you know, where they're going to be at low levels and relatively low risk. Once you get to, you know, 3, 4, 5 years, you know, they'll start to carry fires again. Once you get, you know, beyond 5, 6, 7, 8 years, then the fuel loads, you know, start to get back to what they were previous, you know, and the risk goes up again. So obviously in the short term, we probably won't see a lot of planned burning, but you know, in the next, you know, 3 to 4 years, you know, managing the fuel loads, you know, will be an important, you know, thing to reintroduce.
Yeah, I know. I think the community really understands that they need to be more in or driving that conversation more with the agencies as to how we you know, manage into the future, what we're managing for, and the kind of tools that we're using to do that. And that's something that these webinars will continue to explore. So thanks for raising that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, you know, we work together on this, and you know, it's really encouraging to see the initiative the community's taking about, you know, looking at fuel management around the township, because you need a continuum. You need, you know, good fuel management in the forest, good fuel management on the interface, and people doing the right thing around their houses. So, you know, it's a collective effort.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Peter. That's excellent. We really appreciate your commentary.
No worries. Thanks.